moving over in 1991, and your goal was to plant a church.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was to plant a church that was in the Calvary Chapel family.
Yep.
And there were a handful of Calvary Chapel ministries in Australia on both the East Coast and the West Coast. And so we talked to them about the possibility of getting sponsored, and neither one of them were able to do that because they were kind of at the limit of how many people they could sponsor with the size church.
Oh, you mean the government, like the government sponsorship and stuff?
Yeah,
okay.
And that was to get a Christian workers visa that was to go in and work with them, and then maybe in time branch out and plant.
Did you have to do that in New Zealand when you guys moved there?
Yeah, so we lived in New Zealand for 2 years, and I remember getting your advice about moving to New Zealand too, because it's down under.
Was
I
it
remember
accurate?
Lynn calling me like, "Did it ruin you when your parents moved to Australia?" I was like, "No, I loved it."
I loved it. We did have to get a work visa, but it was easier for us than I'm sure for you, because we didn't go to plant a church, but we went to take over an existing Calvary Chapel that was there in Auckland.
But did Brian Hughes?
Brian Hughes, yep.
Hughes,
yeah. So he was retiring, and he, through a mutual friend, called me up, and it worked out perfectly. We were just in a transition out of our church plant in Washington State, and I mean, we're like, New Zealand, we'll have to pray about that.
Well, let me see.
Beautiful country. Wow.
Oh yeah, gorgeous.
Yeah. And they have hobbits there too.
Yeah, they do.
Right. But we ended up getting sponsored into Australia not by a Calvary, but by an Anglican church.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
It was one of the first churches that I worked with on that. Every trip that we took going over, short trips, 2 weeks to a month. This Anglican church, which was a kind of a spirit-filled Anglican church with a real focus on evangelism, and the pastor was visiting us in California, in the desert there. He said, I'll never forget this conversation, how's your search for the sponsorship going? I said, well, nothing's coming through. He said, well, let us sponsor you. I said,
wow.
Well, that's really generous of you, but I know that God's calling us to come and plant a Calvary Chapel fellowship. He said, well, you can do that. You can even start it when you come, but just serve with us for a year.
Okay.
And do worship and some missions and outreach. And
so when you were planning to go over and plant, I mean, what kind of went through your mind, and what was your vision, I guess, about going there? Just kind of see what happens, or did you have a specific goal in mind?
I didn't know how it was going to work, but I felt like we just seek the Lord and target a community or a suburb or whatever, wherever it was, and then just somehow make our presence known with neighbors and maybe some more outreaches in schools and just see how this went. But that Anglican church, they were so incredibly generous. They said, well, they asked me, well, where do you think you're going to do this? I said, probably out in the southeast suburbs, and nobody will recognize it.
Was that Melbourne?
Yeah, in Melbourne. So the southeast was cities like in Endeavour Hills and Dandenong and some cool, Aussie names. Berwick.
What's the population of Melbourne? Is it?
I think it's
million?
now over 4. It was over 3 at that point. Now I think it's about 4.
So it's a pretty big city.
And Sydney's maybe 5.
Call it a big one.
Yeah. But the pastor of that church said, well, if that's the area that you're really targeting, we've got a lot of people in our fellowship, Christ Church. The name of the town was Dingley.
Dingley.
Yeah.
Nice.
And why don't you just take?
You're gonna go to Dingley, mate?
Dingley.
And it was a beautiful family of people too. But they said, why don't you just contact these people and let them know you're starting a fellowship down there, and see if they want to help you, see if they want to connect with you. And what pastor does that?
Yeah.
And especially if it's out of your
denomination or network. Yeah, exactly.
So Rob Isaacson,
so
Rob and Lois, precious people.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I found it, just living on the mission field, a lot of those differences that we have in the States that are seemingly so significant. Once you get out on the mission field and there's work to do, some of those kind of like you're able to work together a little bit easier.
That's right. That's what worked for us.
So going over with church planting, let's go over there, let's plant a church. First of all, first things first, we need to get that permit.
Yeah.
And you got it.
Yeah, you have to legally get in. You can sneak in, but your time's going to be limited.
Oh, wow.
You want a long-standing relationship.